The stars were dying, and with them, hope itself seemed to freeze in the endless dark. Elena Vasquez pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window of Research Station Omega and watched the last evacuation ship disappear into the swirling snow. The ship's lights grew smaller and smaller until they vanished completely, leaving her alone on Arcturus Prime. The planet that had once been green and warm now lay buried under miles of ice that never melted. Behind her, the communication device crackled with static. "Dr. Vasquez, this is your final warning," came the voice of Commander Harrison from the ship. "The gravitational anomaly from the dying star has made this system too dangerous. The ice storms are getting worse every day. You need to leave now." Elena picked up the device and spoke calmly. "I understand the risks, Commander, but I'm staying." "Elena, be reasonable. The Zephyrians evacuated their crystal cities 3 months ago. The Luminals abandoned their energy stations last week. Even the Nixari gave up their hive colonies. No one can survive what's coming." "Maybe no one can," Elena said, looking out at the white wasteland. "But someone should try." The communication went silent. Elena knew they thought she was crazy. Maybe she was. But she had found something in the deep ice scans that made her heart race with excitement. The other scientists had dismissed her data as equipment errors, but Elena knew better. Something was alive down there in the frozen ground. Something big. For 3 years, the galaxy had watched world after world surrender to the ice. The dying star's gravity had pulled planets out of their normal paths, sending them spinning into the cold dark between stars. Advanced alien races had tried everything to fight the endless winter. The Zephyrians had built massive heating towers that cracked under the cold. The Luminals had tried to warm entire planets with pure energy, but the ice swallowed it all. The Nexari had used their shared minds to calculate thousands of solutions, but none worked. Everyone agreed that life could not survive the ice. Everyone except Elena. She had spent months studying the old records from Earth. Her planet had survived ice ages before. Life had found a way to continue even when everything seemed hopeless. She believed the same thing could happen here, but she needed proof. Elena gathered her equipment and checked her thermal suit one more time. The heating elements were working, and she had enough food and water for a week. Her scanner showed something large moving deep beneath the research station. She had to investigate. The wind outside hit her like a physical blow. Snow whipped across the landscape so hard she could barely see 3 feet ahead. The temperature was minus 40 degrees and dropping. Elena had experienced cold before, but this was different. This cold wanted to kill everything it touched. She followed her scanner toward a series of ice caves about a mile from the station. The readings were getting stronger. Something was definitely down there. Something that radiated heat in patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. The caves went deeper than her equipment could measure. Elena rappelled down into the darkness, her headlamp cutting through the gloom. Ice formations hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The walls were smooth and old, carved by water that had flowed here millions of years ago when this world was warm. 50 feet down, her scanner began beeping rapidly. Elena's heart jumped. The signal was coming from just ahead around a bend in the cave. She moved carefully on the slippery ice, following the tunnel as it curved to the right. What she found made her forget how to breathe. A young mammoth lay on its side in a small chamber. The creature was huge, even though it was clearly just a baby, maybe the size of a small elephant. Its fur was thick and white, adapted for the cold in ways that seemed impossible. But what amazed Elena most was that the air around the mammoth was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the rest of the cave. The mammoth was breathing, but barely. Elena could see that its back legs were twisted wrong, probably broken in a fall through the thin ice above. The creature's eyes were closed, and it made small sounds of pain when it tried to move. Elena knelt beside the mammoth and placed her hand on its massive head. The fur was softer than anything she had ever felt. The mammoth's breathing was shallow and fast. Without help, it would die within hours. "Hey there, little one," Elena whispered, though the mammoth was anything but little. "What happened to you?" As if responding to her voice, the mammoth opened its eyes. They were brown and intelligent, filled with pain but also something else. Hope, maybe, or recognition. The creature looked at Elena as if it understood that help had finally arrived. Elena ran her scanner over the mammoth's body. Both back legs were badly injured, with torn muscles and possibly broken bones. The creature was also severely dehydrated and weak from blood loss. In any normal situation, an animal this badly hurt would not survive. But Elena had not come this far to give up now. She opened her medical kit and began working. The mammoth stayed still as Elena cleaned its wounds and applied emergency bandages. She gave it water from her supply and some high-energy food paste that the creature accepted gratefully. "I'm going to call you Miska," Elena said as she worked. "It's an old Earth name. It means little bear, though you're definitely not little." Miska made a sound that might have been approval. Elena set up her portable heater and established a small camp in the cave. She called back to the research station and activated the emergency beacon. If anyone was still monitoring the planet, they would know she was alive. She doubted anyone would come looking for her, but it was worth trying. Over the next few hours, Elena learned amazing things about Miska. The mammoth's body temperature was much higher than it should be. The creature seemed to generate heat from within, warming the air around it in a way that defied everything Elena knew about biology. When she touched Miska's fur, her frozen fingers began to warm immediately. More incredibly, Miska seemed to understand that Elena was trying to help. The mammoth stayed calm during treatment, and even tried to help by positioning its body to make Elena's work easier. This level of intelligence was far beyond what Elena had expected. As the storm raged outside, Elena sat beside Miska and studied her readings. The scanner showed more life signs deeper in the cave system, lots of them. There were creatures down here that had been sleeping through the Ice Age, waiting for spring to return. But spring might never come. The dying star's gravity had locked this world in permanent winter. Unless someone found a way to help these creatures adapt and survive, they would all die in the dark. Elena looked at Miska, who was now sleeping peacefully beside her heater. The mammoth's breathing was stronger and its legs had stopped bleeding. With proper care and rehabilitation, the creature might walk again. "They said nothing could endure the ice," Elena said quietly. "But they were wrong about you, weren't they?" Outside, the wind howled like the voice of winter itself. But inside the cave, warmed by mammoth fur and human determination, life continued to fight against the cold. Elena pulled out her journal and began to write. Someone needed to record what was happening here. Someone needed to remember that when the galaxy gave up, one human girl and one mammoth cub decided to keep trying. The real work was just beginning. Elena woke to the sound of Miska trying to stand. The mammoth cub was struggling to get its front legs under its massive body, but every time it tried to put weight on its back legs, it collapsed with a cry of pain. "Easy, big guy," Elena said, moving quickly to Miska's side. "Let me take a look at those legs again." 3 days had passed since Elena first found the injured mammoth. She had been living in the ice cave, using her portable equipment to keep them both alive while she worked on treating Miska's injuries. The cave had become their temporary home, warmed by the mammoth's natural heat and Elena's small heating unit. Elena examined Miska's legs carefully. The swelling had gone down and the wounds were healing cleanly, but she could feel that the bones and muscles were still badly damaged. Without proper surgery, Miska would never walk normally again. The problem was that Elena was not a veterinarian. She was a xenobiologist who studied alien plant life. Everything she knew about treating large mammals came from old textbooks and emergency medical training. But Miska was depending on her, and she refused to let the mammoth down. Elena opened her field surgery kit and looked at the tools inside. She had laser scalpels designed for taking plant samples, tissue regenerators meant for growing lab cultures, and bone fusion devices used for repairing archaeological specimens. None of it was meant for surgery on a living creature, but Elena would have to make it work. "This is going to hurt," Elena warned Miska, as she prepared the anesthesia injector. "But I promise it will help you walk again." Miska seemed to understand. The mammoth lay still and looked at Elena with those intelligent brown eyes. There was trust there and something else. A bond was forming between them that Elena had never experienced before. The surgery took 6 hours. Elena worked by the light of her headlamp, carefully repairing torn tendons and realigning broken bones. She used the tissue regenerator to help damaged muscles heal faster, and the bone fusion device to strengthen fractures that would take months to heal naturally. Miska stayed unconscious through most of the procedure, but occasionally, the mammoth would make soft sounds in its sleep. Elena found herself talking to Miska as she worked, explaining what she was doing and promising that everything would be all right. When Elena finally finished, she was exhausted. Her hands were shaking from the delicate work, and her back ached from bending over Miska for so long. But the surgery had been successful. Miska's legs were properly aligned now, and the worst of the damage had been repaired. Elena collapsed beside the sleeping mammoth and allowed herself a few hours of rest. When she woke, Miska was already awake and watching her with curious eyes. "How are you feeling?" Elena asked, checking the surgical sites. Everything looked good. No infection, no excessive swelling. Miska's body was healing faster than Elena had expected. Over the next few days, Elena began physical therapy with Miska. She helped the mammoth do gentle exercises to strengthen the repaired muscles. At first, Miska could only move its legs slightly while lying down. But gradually, the movements became stronger and more coordinated. Elena was amazed by Miska's determination. The mammoth never gave up, even when the exercises were clearly painful. Miska seemed to understand that this hard work was necessary to walk again, but it was not just Miska's healing that amazed Elena. As she spent more time with the mammoth, she began to notice other incredible abilities. Miska could sense changes in the weather hours before they happened. The mammoth would become restless before ice storms and calm before clear weather. Even more remarkable, Miska seemed to be communicating with other creatures in the cave system. Elena would sometimes hear low rumbling sounds coming from deep in the caves, and Miska would respond with similar sounds. It was as if the mammoth was part of a larger community that Elena could not see. Elena started exploring deeper into the caves during Miska's rest periods. She found evidence of a vast underground ecosystem. There were frozen rivers that still flowed beneath the ice, geothermal vents that provided warmth, and signs of many different types of creatures. Her scanner detected dozens of large life forms in hibernation throughout the cave system. They were all generating heat like Miska, creating warm pockets in the ice that allowed life to continue even in the frozen wasteland above. Elena realized she was witnessing something that the galaxy's best scientists had said was impossible. These creatures had not just survived the Ice Age, they had adapted to it. They were thriving in conditions that had defeated advanced alien civilizations. Meanwhile, far above the planet's surface, the alien monitoring stations were recording Elena's activities with growing confusion. The Zephyrian scientists could not understand how a single human was surviving in conditions that had killed their automated research probes. Commander Zix of the Zephyrian High Council studied the reports with crystal blue eyes that reflected his confusion. "This human female has been on the Death World for 8 days, he said to his advisors. "Our calculations show that all biological activity should have ceased within 48 hours. Perhaps the readings are wrong," suggested his second-in-command. "Humans are known to be stubborn, but they are not immune to physics." "The readings are accurate," Zix replied. "This human is not just surviving. She appears to be thriving, and she is doing something with the native creatures that our science cannot explain." Similar conversations were happening on luminal energy ships and Nexari hive vessels. All 3 major alien civilizations were monitoring Elena's progress, and all 3 were baffled by what they were seeing. Back in the cave, Elena was helping Miska attempt to stand for the first time since the surgery. She had built a support frame from pieces of her equipment to help take weight off the mammoth's healing legs. "All right, Miska," Elena said, positioning herself beside the mammoth's massive head. "Let's try this together. Nice and slow." Miska gathered its legs beneath its body and began to push upward. Elena helped by supporting the mammoth's head and neck. For a moment, it looked like they might succeed. Miska's front legs straightened and the mammoth's rear end began to rise. But then Miska's back legs buckled, and the mammoth collapsed with a frustrated grunt. "It's okay," Elena said, stroking Miska's fur. "We'll try again tomorrow. You're getting stronger every day." But Elena was worried. The surgery had been successful, but Miska was still much weaker than a healthy mammoth should be. The creature needed better nutrition and more space to exercise. Most importantly, Miska needed to rejoin its herd. Elena had been studying the seismic readings from her scanner. The low-frequency sounds that Miska made seemed to travel through the ice for miles. Elena suspected that somewhere out there, other mammoths were listening and responding. Miska's family might still be alive. That night, as Elena lay beside the sleeping mammoth, she made a decision. As soon as Miska was strong enough to travel, they would leave the cave and search for the herd. It would be dangerous to travel across the frozen surface, but Miska would never fully recover without the support of its own kind. Elena looked at the mammoth's peaceful face and smiled. 3 weeks ago, the galaxy's greatest minds had declared this planet dead. Now Elena was planning a journey across the ice with a creature that was not supposed to exist. Tomorrow we start walking practice, Elena whispered to Miska. And when you're ready, we're going to find your family. Outside the cave, the wind howled across the frozen landscape. But inside, warmed by friendship and determination, two unlikely companions prepared for the next stage of their impossible journey. Elena held her breath as Miska took his first real steps. The mammoth's legs were shaky and his gait was uneven, but he was walking. After 2 weeks of physical therapy and countless failed attempts, Miska was finally standing on his own 4 legs. That's it. Elena cheered, walking beside the mammoth as he moved slowly around the cave. You're doing it, Miska. The mammoth made a pleased rumbling sound and took another careful step. His back legs still caused him pain, Elena could see, but they were holding his weight. The surgery and rehabilitation had worked better than she had dared to hope. Elena had fashioned a special support harness from straps and padding taken from her equipment. The harness helped distribute Miska's weight more evenly and provided extra support for his healing legs. It was not perfect, but it allowed the mammoth to walk without too much discomfort. For 3 days, Elena and Miska practiced walking inside the cave system. Each day, Miska grew stronger and more confident. His natural healing abilities were remarkable. The mammoth was recovering from injuries that would have taken months to heal in any earth animal. But Elena knew they could not stay in the cave forever. Her food supplies were running low, and more importantly, Miska needed to find his herd. The mammoth had been making low-frequency calls every evening, and Elena's instruments had detected responses from somewhere far across the ice. Miska's family was out there waiting for him to come home. On the 4th day, Elena made her decision. We're leaving tomorrow, she told Miska as she checked his harness one more time. Are you ready for a real adventure? Miska touched Elena's shoulder gently with his trunk, a gesture that had become his way of showing affection. Elena took it as a yes. Elena spent the evening preparing for their journey. She packed her remaining food, water, and emergency equipment onto a sled that she could pull behind her. She programmed her scanner to track the seismic signatures that indicated where other mammoths might be located. According to her readings, the nearest herd was approximately 50 miles northeast of their cave. 50 miles across a frozen wasteland in the middle of an ice storm season. Elena knew the journey would be dangerous, possibly suicidal, but she also knew that Miska would never be truly healthy until he rejoined his own kind. They left the cave just after dawn. The weather was clear for the first time in days, and Elena took it as a good sign. Miska walked slowly but steadily beside her, his breath creating clouds of warm vapor in the frigid air. The landscape above ground was breathtaking and terrifying. As far as Elena could see, everything was white. Snow-covered plains stretched to the horizon, broken only by occasional ice formations that rose like frozen mountains. The sky was a pale blue that seemed to go on forever. Elena had never felt so small. But as they walked, Elena began to notice that Miska was more than just a companion. The mammoth seemed to know exactly where they were going. When Elena's scanner indicated they should turn northeast, Miska was already heading in that direction. When dangerous ice formations appeared ahead, Miska would steer them around the hazards before Elena's instruments detected the danger. Most amazingly, wherever Miska walked, the ground seemed slightly warmer. Elena's thermal readings showed that the mammoth was generating enough heat to keep the ice from becoming dangerously slippery. It was as if Miska was creating a safe path for both of them to follow. On their 2nd day of travel, they encountered their first major obstacle. A deep crevasse cut across their path, too wide to go around and too deep to climb down into. Elena stood at the edge and looked across the gap. It was at least 20 feet to the other side. Looks like we're going to have to find another way, Elena said. But Miska was studying the crevasse with intense concentration. The mammoth walked along the edge for several minutes, making low rumbling sounds. Then Elena heard something incredible, answering calls from the other side of the gap. Elena looked across the crevasse and saw movement in the distance. Other creatures were approaching from the far side. As they came closer, Elena could see that they were not mammoths, but something equally amazing. Giant wolves with thick white fur were running toward the crevasse. But these were not ordinary wolves. They were the size of small horses, with intelligent eyes and an obvious lack of fear toward Elena and Miska. One of the wolves, larger than the others, approached the edge of the crevasse and made a series of barking sounds. Miska responded with his own vocalizations. Elena realized she was witnessing a conversation between two different species. After a few minutes of this exchange, the large wolf turned and led his pack away from the crevasse. Elena was confused until she saw where they were going. About a quarter-mile downstream, the wolves began digging in the snow. "They're showing us something," Elena said to Miska. "Come on." When Elena and Miska reached the spot where the wolves had been digging, they found the remains of an old bridge. It was made from some kind of metal that had not corroded despite being buried in ice for years. The bridge was narrow and looked unstable, but it would support their weight. The wolves watched from the other side as Elena and Miska carefully crossed the ancient bridge. When they reached the far side safely, the large wolf approached Elena and touched her hand with his nose. Then the pack disappeared into the white landscape as quickly as they had appeared. "They helped us," Elena said in amazement. "They actually helped us." Elena began to understand that she and Miska were not alone on this frozen world. There was an entire community of creatures that had adapted to survive the Ice Age. They were working together, helping each other, creating a functioning ecosystem in conditions that should have been impossible. Over the next several days, Elena and Miska encountered more survivors. They met a family of ice bears that shared their fish catch when Elena's food ran low. They were guided through a dangerous blizzard by a flock of white birds that seemed to know exactly where to find shelter. They even encountered what appeared to be ice-adapted deer that showed them where to find unfrozen water. Each encounter taught Elena something new about survival in impossible conditions. These creatures had not just endured the Ice Age, they had created a new way of life. They shared resources, communicated across species barriers, and helped each other overcome obstacles that no individual could face alone. Meanwhile, in the monitoring stations high above the planet, alien scientists were recording everything with growing astonishment. "The human has now traveled 37.6 miles across the Death World," reported an Ixari, drone to its collective consciousness. "She is not only surviving but appears to be communicating with multiple species that our databases list as extinct." "Impossible," replied the collective. "Our calculations show that cooperation between species breaks down under extreme survival stress. Competition for resources should prevent any collaborative behavior. Yet the data is clear," the drone insisted. "The human and the mammoth creature are being actively assisted by other life forms. This contradicts all our models of survival behavior." Similar discussions were taking place among the Zephyrians and Luminals. All three civilizations were being forced to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about life, survival, and adaptation. Back on the surface, Elena and Miska were getting close to their destination. Elena's scanner was detecting more and more mammoth signatures ahead. Miska was becoming increasingly excited, making happy rumbling sounds and walking faster despite his healing legs. On their 7th day of travel, they crested a small hill and Elena saw something that made her heart leap. In the valley below, a herd of mammoths was moving slowly across the snow. There were at least 20 of them, ranging from massive adults to several young calves. "There they are," Elena whispered to Miska. "Your family." Miska raised his trunk and made a loud trumpeting call. The sound echoed across the valley, and every mammoth in the herd stopped and turned toward them. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the adult mammoths began walking up the hill toward them. Elena could see immediately that this was the herd's leader, an enormous female with wise eyes and scars that told of many battles with the ice. As the matriarch approached, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Would the herd accept Miska back after his long absence? Would they accept Elena, or would they see her as a threat? Miska took a step forward on his unsteady legs, ready to reunite with his family. The real test of their journey together was about to begin. The matriarch stood before Elena and Miska like a mountain of fur and ancient wisdom. She was twice Miska's size and carried herself with the authority of a leader who had guided her herd through countless dangers. Her dark eyes studied Elena with careful intelligence. then moved to examine Miska's unsteady stance and the support harness around his body. Elena held her breath as the massive female circled them slowly. She could feel the weight of judgment in every step. The rest of the herd watched from the valley below, waiting to see how their leader would react to the return of their lost member and his strange companion. Miska made soft sounds, almost like a child trying to explain where he had been. The matriarch listened, touching Miska gently with her trunk to examine his healed injuries. Elena could see the moment when the older mammoth understood what had happened, that this small human had saved Miska's life and taught him to walk again. The matriarch turned to Elena and extended her trunk. Elena stood very still as the mammoth touched her face, her hands, and her equipment. The touch was gentle but thorough, as if the matriarch was learning everything she could about this unusual creature who had helped her family. Then, to Elena's amazement, the matriarch made a deep rumbling sound that Elena recognized as approval. The massive mammoth touched Elena's forehead with her trunk, the same gesture Elena had seen mother mammoths use with their calves. Elena had been accepted. The herd welcomed them with obvious joy. Adult mammoths surrounded Miska, touching him with their trunks and making happy sounds. The young calves were especially excited, playing around Miska's legs and trying to get him to play with them. But Elena quickly realized that all was not well with the herd. As she observed them over the next few days, she could see signs of serious problems. Several of the adults were thin and weak. 3 of the calves were coughing, a sign of respiratory illness that could be fatal in the cold. Most worrying of all, the matriarch herself was showing signs of age and sickness. Elena set up her equipment near the herd's resting area and began conducting medical examinations. She discovered that the mammoths were suffering from malnutrition, respiratory infections, and various injuries from falls on the ice. Without proper treatment, several members of the herd would not survive the next major storm. The biggest problem was that the herd had lost hope. Elena could see it in their body language and behavior. They moved slowly without purpose. They barely searched for food, and they had stopped the social interactions that kept mammoth herds strong. Elena realized that saving Miska had been only the beginning. Now she needed to save his entire family. She started by treating the sick calves. Using her medical equipment and techniques adapted from veterinary medicine, Elena was able to clear their respiratory infections and restore their strength. The improvement in the young mammoths gave the whole herd a boost in morale. Next, Elena began teaching the herd new survival techniques. She showed them how to find food sources that were hidden under the ice. She helped them locate geothermal areas where they could rest and stay warm. Most importantly, she taught them how to work together to overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. Elena's methods were different from anything the mammoths had learned before. Where the herd saw an insurmountable wall of ice, Elena saw a problem that could be solved with tools and teamwork. Where the mammoths accepted dangerous conditions as unchangeable, Elena showed them how to modify their environment to make it safer. Miska became Elena's translator and assistant. His experience with human problem-solving methods made him uniquely qualified to help the other mammoths understand Elena's ideas. Together, they began transforming the herd from a group of survivors into a thriving community. The change was gradual but unmistakable. The mammoths began moving with more purpose and energy. They started exploring new areas instead of just following the same safe routes. Most importantly, they began to believe that their situation could improve. Elena was documenting everything in her journal. She recorded new behaviors, adaptive strategies, and evidence of intelligence that contradicted everything the galaxy knew about these creatures. The mammoths were not just surviving, they were evolving new forms of cooperation and problem-solving. But their greatest test came 3 weeks after Elena joined the herd. Elena was awakened before dawn by a sound that made her blood freeze, the deep rumble of an avalanche. She looked up at the mountains surrounding their valley and saw a wall of snow and ice sliding down toward them. The avalanche was massive, covering the entire mountainside. It would reach their location in less than 10 minutes. The herd was panicking. Adult mammoths were trumpeting in alarm while calves cried for their mothers. In their fear, the mammoths were scattering in all directions instead of working together. Elena could see that several members of the herd were running directly toward the path of the avalanche. "Miska!" Elena shouted over the growing roar of falling snow. "We need to get them organized." Miska understood immediately. He began making loud calling sounds that cut through the panic. Elena ran through the herd, using her knowledge of mammoth behavior to guide frightened animals toward safety. But Elena quickly realized that traditional escape routes would not work. The avalanche was too wide and moving too fast. The only safe area was a narrow canyon on the far side of the valley, but it would take too long for the entire herd to reach it using normal mammoth travel patterns. Elena's mind raced as she calculated distances, speeds, and terrain obstacles. There was only one way to save the herd, but it would require every mammoth to trust her completely and follow a plan that went against all their instincts. "Form a line," Elena shouted to Miska. "Tell them to form a single line and follow us." Elena began running toward the canyon, not by the safe route the mammoths would normally take, but directly across a field of thin ice that covered a frozen lake. The ice would support their weight if they moved quickly and stayed spread out, but it would be terrifying for creatures that had learned to fear unstable ground. Miska trumpeted Elena's instructions to the herd. The matriarch, despite her weakness, was the first to understand. She began organizing the other adults into a line behind Elena and Miska. Elena led them across the dangerous ice at a dead run. Behind her, she could hear the thunderous sound of the avalanche getting closer. The ice cracked and groaned under the weight of the running mammoths, but it held. One by one, the members of the herd reached the safety of the canyon. Elena counted them frantically as they passed. 18, 19, 20. All accounted for, they had made it. The avalanche crashed into the valley floor exactly where the herd had been resting just minutes before. The force of it shook the ground and filled the air with snow dust. If they had stayed in place or tried to escape using traditional methods, they would all have been buried. As the dust settled, Elena found herself surrounded by grateful mammoths. The herd was touching her with their trunks, making sounds of appreciation and respect. Even the most skeptical adults were now looking at her as a trusted member of their family. But the most important moment came when the matriarch approached Elena. The old mammoth was breathing heavily from the effort of the escape, and Elena could see that the stress had worsened her condition. The matriarch was dying, and she knew it. With great ceremony, the matriarch touched Elena's forehead with her trunk one final time. Then she made a series of complex vocalizations that caused every mammoth in the herd to become silent and attentive. Elena did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. The matriarch was passing leadership of the herd to her. Elena looked around at the 21 mammoths who were now looking to her for guidance. She thought about the responsibility she was accepting and the challenges that lay ahead. The Ice Age was far from over, and there would be many more dangers to face. But Elena also thought about how far they had come. A few weeks ago, these creatures had been scattered and hopeless. Now they were united, strong, and ready to face whatever challenges the frozen world could throw at them. "All right," Elena said to her new family, "let's find a new home." High above the planet, alien monitoring stations recorded the avalanche and its aftermath. The data showed something that their computers could barely process. Not only had the humans and mammoths survived an extinction-level event, but they had done so through unprecedented cooperation and adaptive problem-solving. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had greatly underestimated both human determination and the power of hope itself. 20 years had passed since Elena first found Miska in the ice cave, and the galaxy was a different place. Elena stood in the meadow that had once been a frozen wasteland, watching Miska's grandchildren play in the warm grass. The mammoth patriarch was now fully grown, his impressive tusks gleaming in the sunlight. His limp had never completely disappeared, but it had not stopped him from becoming one of the strongest leaders in the mammoth community. The meadow was part of New Haven, a thriving city that existed where Elena's research station had once stood alone in the snow. The gravitational anomaly had finally passed 3 years ago, allowing the planet to return to its normal orbit. But by then, the changes Elena and the mammoths had started were already transforming the galaxy. Elena, now in her 40s with gray streaking her dark hair, smiled as she watched a group of Zephyrian children learning mammoth care techniques from Miska himself. The crystal-bodied aliens had been among the first to return to the ice worlds, but not to exploit them. They came to learn. "Dr. Vasquez," came a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to see Ambassador Zix, the Zephyrian who had once declared her mission impossible. His crystalline features had softened over the years, and his rigid posture had been replaced by something more flexible and adaptive. "Just Elena, please," she said with a smile. You know, I never finished that doctorate anyway. Zix made the sound that Zephyrians used for laughter. Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but I believe the University of New Terra would disagree. Your honorary degrees in xenobiology, interspecies communication, and survival psychology suggest otherwise. Elena shrugged. She had never cared much about titles. What mattered to her was the work itself and the lives it had changed. The council has asked me to give you an update on the restoration projects, Zix continued. The results continue to exceed all projections. Elena nodded. The restoration projects had begun 5 years ago, when the 3 major alien civilizations finally admitted that Elena's methods worked better than their advanced technology. Instead of trying to control or escape from hostile environments, the projects focused on adaptation, cooperation, and finding new ways for life to thrive. Across the galaxy, previously abandoned worlds were coming back to life. The Luminals had established energy-sharing networks that allowed different species to support each other during difficult transitions. The Nexari had developed new collective consciousness techniques that included other species as equal participants. Most remarkably, the Zephyrians had learned to bend their rigid thinking patterns, becoming more creative and adaptive. All of these changes had started with one human girl who refused to give up on an injured Mammoth Cub. How is the Kepler Station project progressing? Elena asked. Better than anticipated, Zix replied. The human advisor teams have successfully established cooperation between 6 different species on the ice moon. They are using mammoth-inspired techniques to create sustainable communities in sub-zero temperatures. Elena felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Human advisor teams were now stationed throughout the galaxy, teaching other species the principles Elena had developed on Arcturus Prime. The advisors were not scientists or diplomats in the traditional sense. They were people who understood that the most important technology was often the simplest, the refusal to abandon hope. There is something else, Zix said, his tone becoming more serious. We have received a request for assistance from the Outer Rim. An entire star system is facing ecological collapse due to solar instability. The affected worlds are requesting human advisors specifically. Elena was not surprised. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept that a situation was hopeless. Other species had begun seeking out human assistance, not because humans had superior technology, but because they had something more valuable, an almost irrational determination to find solutions when everyone else gave up. How many worlds? Elena asked. 17 inhabited planets with a combined population of over 2 billion beings from 12 different species. Elena took a deep breath. It was a massive undertaking, but she had learned not to be intimidated by the size of a challenge. Every great achievement started with a single step, just like Miska's first tentative movement after his surgery. We'll help, Elena said simply. As if summoned by their conversation, Miska approached them across the meadow. The massive mammoth moved with surprising grace despite his old injury. Behind him walked a group of young mammoth calves and several alien children, all chattering excitedly about their afternoon lesson in ice survival techniques. Miska gently touched Elena's shoulder with his trunk, a greeting they had shared for 20 years. Elena stroked his fur and smiled at the collection of beings who had become her extended family. What do you think, old friend? Elena asked Miska. Ready for another adventure? Miska made a happy rumbling sound that Elena had learned meant yes. Several of the young mammoths trumpeted their own enthusiasm, eager to help with whatever challenge awaited them. Elena looked around at the thriving community they had built. The meadow was full of impossible things. Alien children playing with mammoth calves, Zephyrian scientists learning empathy from human teachers, luminal energy beings discovering the power of physical touch, and Nexari individuals learning to think independently while maintaining their connection to the collective. All of it had started because one human had refused to leave an injured animal to die alone in the cold. Elena pulled out her journal, the same one she had started writing in during those first days in the ice cave. It was worn and thick now, filled with 20 years of observations, discoveries, and stories. She had been documenting the transformation of the galaxy, one small act of kindness at a time. The thing about impossible situations, Elena wrote in her final entry, is that they're only impossible until someone decides to try anyway. The galaxy told us that nothing could survive the ice. They were wrong. Life doesn't just endure, It finds ways to thrive, to adapt, and to help others do the same. We learned that the greatest technology isn't built in laboratories or factories. It's built in moments when someone refuses to give up on something worth saving. Elena closed the journal and looked up at the sky. Tomorrow she would begin preparations for the journey to the outer rim. There would be new challenges, new species to meet, and new problems that seemed impossible to solve. But Elena was not worried. She had Miska beside her, a team of determined humans ready to help, and most importantly, she had learned the secret that the galaxy's greatest minds had missed. The universe was not about survival of the fittest or the most technologically advanced. It was about survival of the most persistent, the most hopeful, and the most willing to help others stand up when they had fallen down. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had once been written off as lost causes, beings of all species were learning to walk again. They were building new communities, developing new forms of cooperation, and discovering that with enough patience and determination, any broken thing could be made whole. And it all started with a human girl who believed that a mammoth cub was worth saving. Elena stood up and dusted off her clothes. There was work to do, beings to help, and impossible situations to make possible. Miska stood beside her, ready as always to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they walked toward the future, one step at a time. In the communication centers of alien civilizations throughout the galaxy, a simple message was being transmitted to the outer rim. Help is coming. The humans are coming. And for the first time in their history, those words filled the universe with hope instead of fear.